Okay, let's call the meeting to order, and let's do a pledge of allegiance. Mark, would you lead us in the pledge? A little out of the ordinary, but that's what we do.
Touched on today.
Okay, agenda item number 1 is approval of the minutes, but before we do that, the commission did meet in executive session today, and I'll turn to Jim to give us a brief report. Oh, Jim left. We got parking issues because it's a busy day, so. I'm up to you. I made it that far.
So the board did meet in closed session to discuss matters with its real property negotiator on 3 items, and also to discuss with legal counsel anticipated litigation, and no action was taken on any of those items.
Okay, thank you. Looking for approval of the agenda.
So moved?
It's been moved and seconded. Any opposed? Hearing none, that is so ordered. Public comment on matters not on the agenda but within the jurisdiction of the commission. Any public comment? One coming. Okay.
Come on up.
I was not able to make it to last month's meeting. I did talk to Mr. Fabian, and what's concerning me now, like I say, is the appraisals and the appraisal process. You've had us 5 years waiting for the appraisals to come, and they will be coming soon. But what I do not consider fair, though it is legal, is then the timeline we will be on to find other housing. As far as we have 30 days to accept, or we can push it to eminent domain, which will probably go to trial in a year. But like I say, because I've not been around, I haven't read it clearly, and I didn't talk to Mr. Fabian to understand. Eminent domain wouldn't probably go to trial for a year. But I believe you could have me kicked off the property before that if the judge decides that this is an important project and that I'm holding things up. I can't see how I'm going to find another home, the quality of my home, in 90 days. I'm going to have to ask special permission to have my furniture stored for maybe up to a year. I really wish you of the council would talk to him, understand what's next going to happen to us, and just see if you think it's fair. Because as far as I'm concerned still, there was a way to fix the levee in place where you would not have had to have us relocate. The deep wall would have taken care of the problem. The only thing is you wouldn't have financially been able to do it. And that is still the problem I have with this project. Even though you've passed it ahead,
Right.
you know, there's only 10 of us, we can't fight all of you. And that's the way I see it. I don't see a reason for parks and riparian area and river access for recreation should kick us out of our houses. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else? Greg, we understand the issues, right? And we're having discussions or?
Yes, and excuse me, yes, and we'll continue to have dialogue
Okay.
with Ms. McDonald frequently and try to keep her as informed as we are about the process, the timing, and so forth. And there's no sense of urgency to move anybody out of their home in a really short period of time. So we'll work with her as well as the other homeowners as best we can.
Thank you. Okay, looking for approval of the minutes.
Second?
It's been moved and second. Any opposed? Hearing none. That's so ordered. Monthly review of year-to-date revenue and expenses. Mark.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. This cash flow report summarizes receipts and expenditures for the month of July 2014, the first month of fiscal year 2014-15. Fund 870 started the balance for June with about $1 million, and that amount is an adjustment over the amount reported last month and reflects additional debt service that was taken out of the fund and put into the debt service funds. There was no appreciable revenue for the reporting period. Expenditures for the month were generally lower than we've experienced recently and included a general liability insurance premium for $103,000, $60,000 for work on the Southport project, and $28,000 on the RFMP. For the month, agency's expenditures total $204,000. The state fund account stands at $2.4 million, which would bring the combined cash position for the end of July to $2.3. Currently, staff is finalizing a large true-up payment with the state, and when that gets finalized, we're going to try to push that payment through, and we've got some help on the state side to help us get that to happen. The range will be from $3 million for recent project expenses and advances on the existing projects to another additional $3 million on various credits for past work. There are 4 credit areas that we're working on with the state, and the question at hand is whether or not the state will want to see all the documentation in place and reviewed for the 4 credit items, or if they'll let 2 of the credit items go now, which would bring our potential payment up to $5 million, and we're pushing for the latter. That ends the report for this month.
Does any of these holdup of the state reimbursements affect our ability to move forward on our projects?
No, to date, no. And we're getting caught up fast. This payment will bring us up through June 2013, no, June 2014. So we're catching up quite quickly on this process, and we hope to keep on track with it throughout the Southport project so we don't have that lag in our cash flow.
Thank you.
And so there are ongoing discussions with the state as far as the timing of these reimbursements?
Yeah, we'll have to provide some documentation, and then they'll approve the additional credit, and it'll be worth about $1 million all told. But we're trying to get their sense of, they'll pull apart the 4 items and give us the cash for the 2 that have already been resolved and documented while we finish work on the last 2.
Are there any federal payments that may be coming in?
None that I know of.
None that you know of. Even if the GRR is completed, will we be able to go back because of the GRR for some kind of WRDA or whatever?
Well, we have the credit memo, but I think Greg is probably more the person to answer that question. Sorry, Greg.
I'm sorry, trying to coordinate logistical issues. What was the question?
The question is since we're getting very close to putting the GRR out there, when it is completed, will there be any reimbursements for I'll call it the North Project Works, through a WRDA bill or anything like that?
So I think, as you're aware, we were denied credit under 104 for the North Area projects. And since right now credit is only eligible under 221, those projects were completed before the draft milestone of the GRR. So under current law, they would not be eligible for credit. We are and will continue to work with folks back east. So perhaps under the next WRDA bill, it's possible, and we'll be looking to get the law changed to allow for those projects to be creditable under 221 or some other provision. But again, that will not result in any reimbursement. It will not result in the Corps cutting us a check. It just means those expenses will be eligible towards our future non-federal share of core projects. So it's money in the bank, but that we can't cash a check.
Thank you. Any other questions? Hearing none, we'll move to agenda item number 5, and this is consider resolution 140901 regarding the acquisition of real property rights from private property owners affected by the Southport Early Implementation Project. Who do I turn to?
Consent item.
Paul? Oh, no, it is consent. Any questions on consent? Any questions? Hearing none, that is so.
I would move for approval of the consent item presented.
It's been moved and second. Any opposed? Hearing none, that is so ordered. Presentation by the Army Corps of Engineers on status of GRR.
Yeah, we just learned that the city's network is down, and so we can't access the files for the presentations. So I would recommend, if we could, move to forward in the agenda to item number 8, and hopefully it'll give us some time to work through the issues, and we can come back to the presentations.
Okay, we'll give that a try. Agenda item number 8 is consideration of public hearing and considerations of resolutions 140902 and 140903, authorizing an eminent domain action to acquire real property for the I Street Bridge. South Early Implementation Project, APNs, and so forth. Who's handling number 8?
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, this item seeks board approval and adoption of resolutions 140902 and 140903 to authorize eminent domain actions for the acquisition of easements on property owned by the Fong family and FAT Incorporated in support of the I Street Bridge South EIP. The I Street Bridge South EIP was the agency's first EIP project. The project received an encroachment permit from the Central Valley Flood Protection Board in 2008 and completed in 2009. One of the encroachment permit's conditions was the acquisition of permanent levee and flowage easements with conveyance to the Sacramento-San Joaquin Drainage District. Staff has identified the various property interests within the levee footprint and the floodway and is currently acquiring the project easements. The request before the board for the adoption of the resolutions of a necessity for the commencement of an eminent domain action with the FAT and Fong properties requires 4 prerequisites. 1, the public interest and necessity require the project. 2, the project is planned and located in a manner most compatible with the greatest public good and least private injury. 3, the property sought to be acquired is necessary for the project. And 4, an offer to acquire required by the government code has been made to the owners of record. The project meets the prerequisites in that the project is part of the levee system that provides a critical flood risk reduction for the entirety of West Sacramento, the public interest and necessity. The project is located on and improves an existing levee, providing the most public good and least private injury. 3, the levee resides on the subject properties, which makes easement acquisition necessary. And 4, written offers were presented to the owners on April 2nd, 2014. The owners have hired an appraiser and are currently conducting their own independent appraisal. That concludes the presentation at this time, and I'll open the hearing.
Anybody have any questions? Because I do have somebody that wants to speak to this issue. Mr. Val Toppenberg.
Thank you, Chairman Christoph, members of the board. I'm representing the FATs and the FONGs in this matter. And they wanted to express that they recognize the need for flood improvements. Flood improvements to protect West Sacramento properties and homes and citizens is very important, and they support those improvements in the flood program. They also recognize that their property is essential to flood improvements, and I think that they recognize that, you know, these actions have to take place. One of the things that we had to do is to receive the appraisal data from the flood agency, and then find an appraiser of our own to conduct an appraisal in our behalf. It was a challenge to find that appraiser, one that had no conflicts, because there's a lot of appraisers out there working on this project, because it's a big project and an important project. And secondly, one that's familiar with the Sacramento area and some of the riverfront areas of the city. They have found AGI valuations. AGI valuations has what we were looking for. They have engaged AGI, and they're in the process of preparing those appraisals. We actually should have some preliminary data in the next few days, and that's the good news. The actual documented appraisal will take a little bit longer. We'd like to have the opportunity to, once we get the valuations from the appraiser, to sit down and talk. We think that we have no problem with you adopting the resolution, but we'd like to ask that before you file the action in the courts and kind of force them into a position where they have to hire an attorney to represent them, that we have the chance to sit down and discuss those valuations and perhaps come to some agreement on those. So with that, again, thank you for the opportunity to come before you today. We're hopeful that we can complete a transactions in the best interests of both the property owners and the flood agency, and look forward to that process. So thanks again, and have a good day.
Hey, Chelsea, since we're having some technical difficulties, I just want to make sure everything is being taped. Okay, Your Honor, thank you.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
it would be appropriate, having opened the public hearing, if there are no other comments, to actually formally close the public hearing before taking action.
Okay. Let's open the public hearing.
It's already been opened.
It's open when
Oh, it is
when he came up.
Right. Any other comments? This is a public hearing, so any comments? Hearing none, I will close the public hearing and turn to my members here and see if there are any other comments, any questions.
Well, I would just make the comment that, you know, this project was completed several years back, and we need to complete the acquisition of the properties in order to close it out and receive our final reimbursements from the state and have the project completed. I appreciate the property owners in what was said today, but I think it's prudent to go forward with the eminent domain action, but I would ask staff to, hopefully they heard what the property owners have said, and if they are able to come forward in a timely manner, that we resolve it that way. But so I would move that we move forward with the action. Make the motion.
It's been moved and second. I really don't have any comments, so it's been moved and seconded, and are there any opposed? Hearing none, that is so ordered. Okay, now we come back to agenda item number 7, I believe.
6.
6. Are we going to, 6, yes.
And Mr.
Do we
Chairman?
have it?
We do.
We do. All
So-
right. Presentation by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers on the status of the GRR.
So today's presentation will be done by Mr. Andrew Muha from the Army Corps of Engineers.
All right, thank you for the introduction, Greg, and thank you, Board, for having us. I am Andrew Muha with the Army Corps of Engineers, and I am the lead project planner for the West Sacramento project. I just want to go to the next slide, please. All right, our purpose of the presentation today is kind of inform the board on the status of the project, kind of tell you where we've been, and also the next steps to eventually get to our chief's report and eventually project authorization. The last time we were here was in January of 2013. We had completed the feasibility scoping meeting back in March of 2012, and at the same time, the Corps had their planning modernization initiative, which we were kind of going through and figuring out the implications of that initiative. So we've come a long way since then. Unfortunately, Alicia Kirshner had been making the presentations. He's our planning division chief, and she's ill today, so she wasn't able to make it. So I'm here to help her out and help the Corps out. All right, so the planning modernization bottom line was to have the studies completed in a shorter length of time for a cheaper price, essentially. They kind of had the 3x3x3 mandate to have a project done for under $3 million in less than 3 years, and then with 3 levels of vertical coordination. So since that came out, we have been focusing this project on that initiative and trying to work through and acknowledging that we're going to be taking risk and acknowledging the uncertainty of some of the decisions we're going to make. Okay, next slide. Okay, so the major milestones we completed, and just I want to emphasize that this project is a joint effort between the state, the WSAFCA, and the state of the Corps, WSAFCA, and the state of California. In March of 2009, WSAFCA signed the feasibility cost sharing agreement with the Corps, and then in July of 2010, the state joined as an additional project sponsor. Okay, the public scoping meeting was then held in this building in July of 2009, and that was to announce that the project was underway and EIS was going to be prepared, and also to solicit any public comments. From there, we identified the problems and opportunities and established the without project condition. Now, the without project condition is important to establish. It kind of shows what kind of would happen here without the project, without a project, because it forms the baseline from which alternatives are compared down the road. We then, after we had established a without project condition, we had our feasibility scoping meeting in March of 2012. We successfully met that milestone, so we were allowed to pursue evaluating measures and alternatives. Okay, so then with involvement from the vertical team, we then formulated, evaluated, and compared alternative plans, then identified the tentatively selected plan, which was presented to the vertical team at the tentatively selected plan milestone conference in May of 2014. We successfully completed that milestone, and with concurrence from the vertical team, we were allowed to release the public draft of the GRR and the EIS-EIR. The public draft was released on July 18th of 2014. All right, next slide, please. Now, to go through the next steps of the project and kind of show you an outline of how we're going to get to the end, so we'll eventually get authorization. Right now, there's concurrent reviews of the GRR and the EIS and EIS-EIR are occurring. The public review comment ended on September 2nd. We had 7 or 8 comments from the public so far. I think one more is still to be coming in. We're also doing agency technical review. Agency technical review is done by Corps personnel, subject matter experts in districts outside of, in divisions outside of South Pacific. Ours is really actually headed up by people in the Southwest Division out of Tulsa and Dallas. So it's an independent kind of Corps review of our project. And also, it is being under policy review at the division headquarters and actually in Washington, D.C. at USACH headquarters. And also, we're doing an independent external peer review. Now, this is very similar to the senior board of consultants that you guys use for the 408 projects. Again, the public review period began on each in July and ended on 2 September, excuse me. All right, so now we're currently responding to the public ATR and IEPR comments. Now, the next milestone is the agency decision milestone, and is scheduled for January of 2015. We will be able to have that conference when we've successfully resolved all of the comments from everybody, the public, agency, and IEPR comments. At that milestone conference, the team, after successfully completing that milestone, the team will then complete the feasibility level design of the selected plan and prepare the final GRR and EIS-EIR. After that, we have the final report and EIR-EIS submittal, which is April of 2015. That initiates a series of Washington-level reviews and actions, including the Civil Works Review Board, and will ultimately culminate in the Chief's report. Now, the Civil Works Review Board is scheduled in June of 2015. I'm jumping ahead of myself. in June of 2015. And see, so after the Washington level review of the final report, we conduct the Civil Works Review Board, where the agency makes a corporate decision that that report is ready to submit for further Washington, like Office of Management and Budget, and further in state and federal review. After that review has been done, the Chief's report is prepared. Now, the Chief's report is essentially an executive summary of the report that has the cost apportionment, and it is ultimately presented to Congress, the Chief's report. So the signing of the Chief's report will be in October 2015. And then authorization and appropriation is going to be dependent on when we have the next WRDA. As you're aware, there was a WRDA in 2014. One prior to that was in 2007. So hopefully it won't be that long a time between them now, but we can't really predict exactly what's going to happen with Congress. Another important thing we've done, next slide, please, is regarding the Section 221 credit. Now, you guys are aware that the Section 221 credit has been initiated to take over the Section 104 credit. And one of the things that it did was you had to be later in the process. The release of the draft report had to be completed before you could sign the MOU to establish that you were eligible for that credit. And that the Corps did that just so they could be more sure that the project that was moving forward was the one that was actually going to get built. So that the memorandum of understanding was signed in July of 2014 between the Corps, West Sacramento, and the state. And then signing of the MOU means that a portion of the cost of the project is eligible for credit as part of the larger West Sacramento project. Okay, the next slide. Now, as you're aware, our tentatively selected plan is Alternative 5, which is the improving the levees, and it also includes the Southport setback levees. Now, the majority of the fixes along the reaches are going to be fixed in place. We're going to the extent possible, we're just going to improve the levees in place with slurry walls and stability measures. Now, we looked at a number of different alternatives before arriving to our final array. And we looked at upstream detention and some off-stream storage, off-basin storage for transitory storage. And what we found that based on the condition of the levees, none of those upstream detention or storage alternatives lowered the water surface enough that would negate the need to do the levee improvements. So even if we'd had off-stream storage, based on the condition of the levees, they still had to be improved. So improving the levees is the first increment of any plan that we were going to do. Okay, and then so like I said, all the improvements will predominantly be fixed in place, and then the setback levee in Southport is incorporated in our study. It addresses the levee concerns and also provides potential habitat improvements. The next slide, and I know that Eric is going to touch on this a little more during his presentation, but the TSP is consistent with the regional flood management plan. Part of the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan is, one of their first thing is to improve the flood protection for the urban areas. And West Sacramento is one of the urban areas within the flood management plan footprint. So improving this area fits very tightly in with the regional plan. And also the TSP is a critical subset because it provides flood risk management for West Sacramento, and it also provides with the Southport setback opportunities for ecosystem restoration. And with that, we are done with the presentation. If you guys have any questions?
Questions?
Sure.
All right.
In your district's opinion, the office here, how solid is this schedule?
I think the schedule is very solid. We just went through what is called a course of action with headquarters. We had to prepare, because this project is considered a legacy project, which were all supposed to be completed by December 2014. So we realized with various things, happening, some of our schedule, I didn't really hit on that, but some of our problems with their schedule are agency coordination with NIMS and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and also is scheduling and review process internal to the Corps itself. So we had to develop a course of action to get the headquarters blessing that since we were moving beyond December 2014. And that just happened at the very end of September, where they agreed with our schedule and allowed us to move forward with the study. So based on what we know right now, I think we're very comfortable with the current schedule.
Okay, because I'm, and I'll accept it as you're saying it, but October 2015 is, if that's doable, will probably work. I take Congress at their word that they do plan to have a WRDA in the next Congress.
Okay.
How quickly it happens, it'll probably go into 2016 as the last one did, but we can't afford to miss that.
Right.
In order to be able to provide the additional protection that's going to be needed for the city here.
Sure.
So whatever can be done to stay on that schedule, and I understand there's outside agencies and whatnot that
Right.
You need to coordinate with, but whatever we can do to assist in that, and, please let us know, and our staff, consultants, or whatever will, or from a political perspective, we'll try to assist it. But as much as we can, stay on that schedule would be fantastic.
Right. Well, Corps Management is working with the resource agencies now to see how we can expedite their review of these studies. So they're actively trying to address the situation.
How does, that they're doing that combined biological assessment?
Right.
And, that gives them, if they're timing to complete for our GRR, are we going to be able to get the permits we need to move forward with our projects, our 408 permit and whatnot, to be able to move forward with our Southport project ahead of a GRR chief's report?
Well, depending on when we get the biological opinion completed, that will be the trigger for that. Is that
Okay.
right, Eric? Yes.
That's another thing
Right.
we want to make sure
Yeah, that gets completed.
Stays in.
Right, so I'm encouraged, they're talking right now, management between the agencies and the district are talking to see how we can expedite the process.
And then one last question, you kind of touched on it, how you looked at our project or West Sacramento by itself, and what off-stream storage or other types of facilities, how that would affect our need to improve our levees. What off-stream storage things were you looking at?
Well, we looked at some transitory storage in some of the upstream basins, like, I can't remember the RD numbers, but up further north, like in Sutter County and up farther north, some of the more agricultural basins, and just looking at them for transitory storage during big events. But what we found that the cost to do that was very prohibitive, but more importantly, that it just didn't draw down the water levels enough that we still had to improve our levees anyway.
Okay.
I mean, that would be a great bonus for redundancy or resilience, but it didn't negate the need that we had to improve the levees right here in West Sacramento.
And coordinating the timing of all that would be...
Right. Well, and it turned out you needed to improve all those levees to make, in those basins, so it would function as you wanted to make it work. So that was a real cost factor.
Okay, thank you.
Any questions? Only question I have, and that is, Tommy's really sort of pushed all the right buttons, I think, and that is there any way we can piggyback off of last year's WRDA?
I don't think so.
Has that ever
Based on my knowledge of the whole
Nation-
process, I would say no.
Never happened?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, okay. I was just hoping.
Once it's signed, I think it's a done deal. for
It
that
was,
WRDA.
it was discussed.
Okay.
As, in the language of the bill, but no, it's cut. It's as of the
Right.
date of
Yeah, I know.
the
Yeah. I
signing of the bill.
I
That's it.
understand, but I was hoping Doris, or
Yep.
from a political perspective, there was something we could
There
try.
was people all over the country trying to get on that train.
Okay, well, I thank you very much
All
for your
right, thank you.
comments.
Appreciate it.
The GRR is an extremely important document for the city of West Sacramento, and it will be the document that allows for the potential of additional flows and of money and other things that we are doing now from a engineering perspective, and all of the things that we're spending money on now for reimbursement processes. And so with all that said, is there anybody from the public that wants to comment on the GRR, the importance or anything like that? Okay. Agenda item number 7, presentation on the Lower Sacramento North Delta Regional Flood Management Plan, consideration of resolutions 1408, 1404, supporting the plan and continue efforts toward implementation.
Mr. Chairman, members of the board, just real briefly as I introduce this item, I just want to remind the board that sometime last year, the board had approved the application to DWR for a directed grant towards the development of the Regional Flood Management Plan. WSAFCA is the grant administrator for the development of this region, the Lower Sacramento Delta North Regional Flood Management Plan. Myself and Paul Dirksen from the WSAFCA staff have been participating at the project delivery team level in the development of this plan. The plan is now complete. And Eric Nagy with MBK Engineers, part of the project development team, will be presenting a summary of the plan elements, and basically where we go from here.
Thanks, Greg. Members of the board, I appreciate the opportunity to brief you today and provide an update on the Regional Flood Management Plan. Again, Eric Nagy with MBK Engineers, consultant to WSAFCA. My intent here in this briefing, and I hope to accomplish this relatively quickly, is to essentially address 4 questions. Those questions are, how did the regional planning process come about? What have we done in the last 12 months as part of that regional planning process? Where do we plan to go now that we've completed the first round of regional planning? And finally, and to some degree, most importantly, why do we care? How does it all translate back to West Sacramento and the importance of regional planning as part of your efforts to improve the flood system here for the city? As far as how did regional planning come about, the Central Valley Flood Protection Act of 2008 required the development of a Central Valley Flood Protection Plan. And in DWR's development, the Department of Water Resources development of that Central Valley Plan, there was a fair amount of a dialogue that occurred in the lead up to the Central Valley Board adoption of that plan in 2012 around the avenues or the mechanisms for the the significant number of levee maintaining agencies that exist within the Central Valley to provide feedback into that process, both through the Department of Water Resources and to the Central Valley Flood Protection Board. That challenge to manage that communication and coordination between all of those local parties, like yourself, other joint powers authorities, and the many reclamation districts that exist in the valley, really presented a challenge to the Central Valley Flood Protection Board. And as a result of adopting the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan in 2012, they made a commitment to initiate regional planning and to use that regional planning process as a means to manage that communication between those local agencies, try to focus their voice into regional voices, and then to consider that feedback as part of developing the updated plans that are also required as part of the Central Valley Flood Protection Act. Essentially, the adoption of the 2012 plan was not a singular milestone in time, in so much as the act requires it be updated every 5 years. And the Central Valley Flood Protection Board took a step towards learning lessons from the development of that initial plan and trying to better manage that communication through subsequent updates of the plan. As many of you are probably already aware, the next update is due in 2017. And that update is intended to not only provide an update of the plan that was adopted in 2012 in terms of the content of that plan, but it's also intended to really incorporate 3 major additional components. Those 3 components are the 2 basin-wide feasibility studies that are under development and have been under development by the Department of Water Resources for both the Sacramento watershed and the San Joaquin River watershed. The second item is to expand on the conservation strategy framework that was included in the 2012 plan and expand it to a full conservation strategy for the Central Valley. And then the third element that they have committed to incorporate is the regional planning, the regional flood management plans that have been developed as part of these regional planning processes. Next slide, please. In establishing this regional planning process, the Department of Water Resources looked at the state plan of flood control and divided the facilities in the state plan of flood control and the associated protected areas into 9 regions. And their intent was to have 9 regions develop regional flood management plans. As the regions started to look at those footprints and have communication amongst the agencies that are in or adjacent to those regions, the local regions actually decided to change the number from 9 to 6. And that happened in this region where the North Delta was separate from the lower Sacramento, and there was a decision to actually combine those regions, establish a different regional planning boundary, and accomplish the first round of regional planning around a larger region than was originally proposed. As you could see, I've listed the other 6 regions, and it's important in so much as even though there are only 6 regions that encompass the state plan of flood control facilities, it's not only important to manage the dialogue within a particular region across the wide variety of interests that exist, particularly in our region, but to also maintain a pretty robust dialogue with the regions upstream and downstream of you. It's all one system. So whether it's 2 pieces or 10 pieces, it's really all one set of water bodies that all interact dynamically. Next slide, please. The intent of this regional flood management planning process, as I indicated, was really to provide a local voice, to allow the locals to come together, communicate as flood management, land use, emergency responders, and other types of stakeholders, and articulate a common set of local needs back to the Department of Water Resources as they continue to look at how to modernize the flood system that we have in the Central Valley. Obviously, part of that is prioritizing flood management actions in a particular region, and this is something that Andrew just touched on. It's this recognition that clearly the high consequence areas should be the immediate recipient of funds that are available because of what's at stake in those high consequence areas. And as a result, the urban areas have been the focus of a significant amount of not only the regional planning effort, but a majority of the flood management planning, design, and construction activities that have taken place since the passage of SB 5, Senate Bill 5, and Proposition 1E. One other thing that's happened throughout this process is, a majority of our efforts up to date have been individual stakeholders, so to speak, engaging in the department with, I'd say, a misperception that there's not good alignment in all cases between those various local stakeholders' points of view and interests with regard to the flood management system and how they engage with the Department of Water Resources. I think many regions, including our region, have found that the interests that West Sacramento have are much more aligned than interests, are much more aligned with the interests of other urban stakeholders in the region, as well as, frankly, many rural community interests and agricultural stakeholders. In other words, there's much more alignment between our needs and what we prioritize or value than there are differences. And I think that's been only accomplished through the discussions that have happened through the regional planning process. It's this understanding that we are a much tighter coalition than any individual member may have thought leading into the regional planning process. Next slide, please. So our current status, that's where we came from. That's what we set out to accomplish. Now, what's our current status? As Greg indicated, the report is complete and was submitted to the Department of Water Resources on July 21st. I believe our region was the first region to submit a final report. The remaining regions are scheduled to complete somewhere between now and I think the end of the calendar year. The final report is available online, and I believe the last slide has the web address. And so anybody who's interested in looking at that final report, it's available publicly. The final report recommends 116 projects, and those projects are estimated to cost a little over $2 billion. It's a significant number. Those 116 projects are completely consistent with, include, and prioritize highly all of the projects that are in your current program. As far as the projects or the levee improvements that are recommended as part of the GRR, as well as any individual projects that you're proceeding with or leading in terms of implementation through the 408 process or otherwise. So there is strong consistency between the regional planning findings and recommendations and your program. Certainly, while the number of projects appears skewed towards the non-urban areas, the reality is the distribution of projects matches land use in the region pretty well. If you look at land use in the region as defined by our regional planning area, a lot of people think of our region as an urban region. And really, as you look at land use totals in the region, we're about 65% rural lands or agricultural use lands, and only less than 20% really urban or developed lands. So the distribution of projects actually reflects that pretty well. Now, with that said, the distribution of projects doesn't equal the distribution of estimated cost. And so while the number of projects are skewed towards rural or small community projects, actually the dollar amounts are about the opposite of that. They're skewed towards investment in the rural areas because the cost of doing business in an urban area is just greater. Next slide, please. The Regional Flood Management Plan, aside from recommending a large number of projects, also makes a number of recommendations with regard to next steps. These next steps include continued coordination with the basin-wide feasibility studies to make sure that the findings of the regional plan are communicated and captured as part of the basin-wide planning studies or feasibility studies. There's certainly some policy topics in terms of emergency response and operations and maintenance optimization, I guess I'll say, that are recommended as part of the study, seeking opportunities to do that and be more effective with the use of limited funds that are available. It also recommends the Integrated Water Management Plan, and Integrated Water Management Plan for the Yolo Bypass and Cache Slough area. As most folks in the water world are familiar, the Yolo Bypass has become the apple of many folks' eyes. There are a lot of people that believe, project proponents that believe the Yolo Bypass can serve a lot of functions beyond the function it was originally intended to serve, which is as a flood conveyance facility. That certainly includes habitat enhancement, expanded agricultural use, and to some degree as a water supply delivery system. And so from the standpoint of our region and the work that's been done as part of the Regional Flood Management Plan, there's a recommendation to develop an integrated water management plan for the Yolo Bypass and Cache Slough, and I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. Next slide. The goal of that integrated water management plan is to really try to truly integrate multiple objectives in any efforts that are undertaken in the bypass. There are many projects that are singularly focused in their objective. As I indicated earlier, the bypass is a flood conveyance system. There's certainly the opportunity to modernize it and transform it into a more effective piece of real estate in the heart of the Central Valley in terms of what it accomplishes, but that has to be done very thoughtfully, and it has to consider all of the interests that are associated with the bypass, including the landowners, the adjacent property owners, the land use agencies, the economic interests associated with the bypass, the adjacent communities that not only either operate or maintain those levees, but are protected by those levees. And so the regional flood management team has, to some degree with completion of the regional flood management plan, sort of shifted its focus to this concept. That focus, it has resulted in a continued dialogue and really in a lot of ways an expanded dialogue with the Department of Water Resources around the YOLO bypass, and that dialogue has expanded to multiple parts of the Department of Water Resources, not just the flood management folks, but the other parts of DWR that are more interested in water supply or ecosystem enhancement. Next slide. I don't really intend to address this list, but these really are the types of elements that are included in that integrated water management plan, and it's built around the concept that as these ideas have come up in the past, they've been presented in ways where there's winners and losers, and that's created a stalemate to a large degree in our ability to meaningfully improve the system from a system point of view and not just individual components of that system. The concept that we can all get better together by bringing together a set of elements that allow the local agencies to commit to something more meaningful than they would if they were to just view their own interest, and to view any given project proposed by a different proponent as you win or you lose, or you're kept whole, so to speak, but you don't actually gain anything, then there's really no incentive to be a proponent of a project or an advocate or to kind of advance the cause. And so the Integrated Water Management Plan is built around a collection of plan elements that allow for that all boats to rise, so to speak, philosophy. Next slide. With that, I'd like to, before I take questions, talk about how does this impact the City of West Sacramento directly and the West Sacramento Area Flood Control Agency directly. Without question, having two borders of your flood system against bypass elements, it creates an opportunity where I think it's important for this board, its staff, to engage proactively in those discussions. In essence, you want to be in control of your own destiny. You don't want to be reactive, you want to be proactive, and the regional flood management planning program and your role as grant administrator and the dedication of Greg and Paul's time as part of that effort has really allowed you to exert leadership and a proactive approach in those regional discussions so that you can essentially control your own destiny to some degree. And I think that's important to not lose sight of. Without question, there's an opportunity to the degree that we can create a unified voice in the region, that we can be more influential as a region. And so instead of a singular entity, single agency trying to voice its interest with somebody like the Department of Water Resources, to the degree that we could leverage a coalition of interests, particularly multi-objective interests, in that discussion, it certainly allows for an opportunity to more meaningfully move the dial, if you will. There's certainly, I think, more practical or tangible implications, and that is in terms of modification of system elements that benefit the system should not necessarily be borne solely by the adjacent land use either agency or interest. And so to some degree, the YOLO bypass levees, the Sacramento bypass levees, they do protect the City of West Sacramento, but they also provide a larger system function. And to that end, the opportunity exists to better leverage state and federal investment in the improvement of those facilities so that the cost of those capital improvements are not solely borne by the city of West Sacramento in a standard cost-sharing arrangement with the state and federal partners. And that's something that the state is acknowledging more and more, that improvements to those system elements are really more the responsibility of the state to bear because of the benefits that they provide to a larger region than solely the benefits they provide to your jurisdiction. And so the regional planning process, the basin-wide feasibility studies, and to some degree the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan provide an opportunity to kind of continue that dialogue and continue to emphasize the role that those levies play in providing a larger system benefit. That concludes my remarks. I'm happy to take questions.
All right, you had a question? Yeah, I do. Go ahead. Yeah, the bypass. When you listed the different things that people are looking at and all of the other kinds of things, widening the weir and all the other kinds of things. From a West Sacramento perspective, I just want to make sure that there is no additional risk to the city by having the bypass carry more flow, having the bypass be more of an area that becomes saturated continuously because we are widening where we're doing some things upstream. Because I think that one of the things we need to look at, and that would be the protection of West Sacramento in those kinds of instances. Because I can remember when the bypass is, I was born and raised here, when the bypass was really flowing, there's a lot of things that are happening, and as far as West Sacramento is concerned. And I want to make sure that if there are even additional flows on top of what some of real high water marks and things have been, that West Sacramentans remain safe. And so, I mean, I don't know how I guess the only way to do that is to articulate those kinds of concerns at a meeting like this or something, and then pass those kinds of concerns on to staff, because I didn't hear in your comments that there's a public comment period for this particular project or whatever it is. But I want to make sure that we receive the document, we get to look it over, and we get to provide comment to some of the areas of concern.
Yeah, I think it's an excellent point, and I think it's a point that really goes beyond just regional flood management planning. It's something that really is a constant concern within the system as we live in a very complicated flood management system, and to even a larger degree, a more complicated water delivery system. And it's the transfer of risk. That's a topic that the Corps talks about a lot, rightfully so. It's sort of how are we transferring risk amongst different parts of the system, and it's something that we're very vigilant about, and the Corps requires us to be, frankly, and I think that's excellent that they do that. To speak directly to the regional flood management planning process, there were a series of public meetings held in association with that regional flood management plan. To some degree, there was the ability to provide public comment. Without question, you're well represented in that process, and your interests are well represented. So at the end of the day, I think that concern, while an important one, is something that we're always thinking about. From a more general point of view, there's kind of two ways to look at your question. One is, would you rather have water in the Sacramento River versus the Yolo bypass, right? Because are we moving or essentially transferring that additional water from one water course to another? And the answer is, from an engineer's point of view, you would prefer it to be in the bypass as opposed to the Sacramento River. The bypass is a better managed, better designed, developed particularly for that purpose facility, and since the upgrades that occurred around 2000, for the city of West Sacramento specifically, it's a much more robust set of levees than you have currently on the Sacramento River. But the question also comes back to, is there just more water, period? Not just where is it going, but is there just more water? And, you know, that's the point of a lot of discussion right now in terms of climate change, in terms of reservoir operations at Folsom and further upstream in the watershed. And, you know, again, that's something that, you know, I would have to say stay tuned. Now, as part of the Integrated Water Management Plan, one of the things that we've made very clear as a region is the opportunity to peer review technical products that are produced by the department in association with any of their planning efforts, whether it's the Central Valley Flood Protection Plan update, whether it's in association with a water delivery or water supply project, that we have an opportunity to peer review those, and that peer review is funded by the department, or at least cost shared by the department, for the purposes of providing an independent assessment from the local or regional point of view in terms of the technical findings or conclusions in association with one of those technical reports or studies. And they've been very receptive to that, frankly. And we've already done some of those types of reviews on products developed by the department as part of this process.
Yeah, or it could be additional storage, could be one of the
Correct.
answers.
Correct.
And so, you know, because rhetorically, I've asked the question to a few of my friends in the water business, and that is, if Auburn Dam were completed, where would we be in the whole scenario of water, flood protection, whatever it is? Now, it was never done, and that fight's fought. It'll never come, never be.
Don't say never.
Well, don't say never. But at the same time, I mean, you know, where would we be? And so storage becomes, I think, part of the equation. Because, I mean, if you can conclude that, boy, we'd really be much better off. But at the same time, it's just an issue that I think needs to be looked at as far as storage is concerned.
Well, to speak to that directly, I think your point is reflective of something that you see, or as a project proponent, that Andrew talked about as part of the GRR formulation, and that is the array of alternatives being considered expansive enough? And really, that's the point of, I think, your question or your comment, is that do we have an opportunity to provide input back to that process that says, we don't believe that your array of alternatives is broad enough, and that there are things that you're not considering as part of this process that
I don't want to delay the GRR.
Right, well, right. And I'm not saying it's part
I
of the
need
GRR,
it quickly as I can get it.
I'd say that headquarters has already
got it.
blessed the GRR as saying that array is complete enough. But in terms of DWR's planning process,
Tom?
Just a few questions, Eric. I was able to attend quite a few of those regional meetings, as well as some local workshops on the Elkhorn area, so fairly familiar with what's being, you know, talked about. But that list of projects and the $2 billion, how'd we come up with that number of projects? And was $2 billion a target thing, or that's just what they all add up to? Or and what are the other regions coming up with?
I don't know that I could answer the last part of that
Okay.
question, but because their reports aren't complete yet. I would say in terms of the list of projects, that list was largely generated through an extensive series of, I'll say, stakeholder engagement, interviews with individual reclamation districts or joint powers authorities that are focused on flood protection, for the purposes of kind of collecting what are the list of projects that you have in your 5-year plan, that you have in your capital improvement budget, you know, that type of exercise. So I would say it was compiling a lot of existing thoughts around projects. There were some projects that were added through the regional planning process that were developed sort of solely through that process, but by and large, it's a compilation of existing projects that are out there. The $2 billion number, not a target, but I would say that there is a significant amount of that list of projects that are not as well developed as, the projects that the city here or the city of Sacramento have developed, and so they're pretty conceptual reconnaissance level, if you will, price, cost estimates. And so their reliability or certainty is they're guesses, they're professional guesses to some degree.
So
And so I don't feel like we should put too much stock on that $2 billion number. It's a point of reference, and to the degree that your program is reflected in there accurately, that's been done. There's a lot more certainty around your program number than there would be for somebody else in
Bypass
the
work.
region that hasn't advanced the work to the degree that you have.
Okay, and our projects, West Sacramento Levee Improvement Project, is included in that 2 billion, as well as a lot of the SAFCA projects
Yep.
projected to happen?
Yes,
Okay, so that
I would
takes,
say
that's where you,
verbatim.
the lopsided deal. And I agree with Bill on the, the next step would be the prioritization of these projects and what happens first or second, and like he said, any adjustments to the system that would put more water in the bypass, we need to make sure that our levee improvements on the west side are ahead of that or equal to it, so, at some point. And then we're here today to do a resolution to support the plan and continuing efforts. Is that being requested from other agencies?
It is,
around here?
actually. There's a pretty extensive roadshow, if you will, that's happening last month and this month. I would say a majority of the major players in the regional planning process are taking or have been asked to take similar actions or votes of support or endorsement. The SAFCA board has already approved Yolo County, City of Woodland, Solano County Water Agency, Reclamation District 2068, the West Sacramento City Council, I believe, will have an action on next week's agenda. So pretty much the major players in the region are all being asked to endorse the plan that's been developed, endorse or support continued planning activities. And that's really our way of not just producing a final book, so to speak, but to close the loop with the elected officials that originally supported the process and maybe in a lot of cases participated, and formalizing that support across those local agencies with the Department of Water Resources to show that this isn't just a book. This is something that all of these local agencies have invested meaningful effort and time in, and they support the outcome and the continuation of this activity.
Ultimately, who chooses, who prioritizes? DWR and what's the role that the Corps and the feds play in this?
That's a difficult to answer question. I think as partners, long-standing partners with these parties, we need to make those decisions together, and that would be our intent, is to make those decisions together. I don't know that there's any one party that makes that decision so much as partners in flood management in the valley, we make those decisions as a team.
Okay, let's carry on.
My only question is, this really isn't a question, it's a statement. When you go to multi-use on the bypass, flood control was what it was designed for originally. And in this day and game, that when you start another program, if it turns out that it doesn't work, it's awfully hard to undo. So be careful when you start messing with flood. Because if you start planting vegetation and stuff out there, you impede the flow greatly. And if that bypass turns into a wetlands, you're going to have an awful lot of vegetation just trying to grow, even if you're trying to fight it. It's just a statement. It's not a question. I don't know how you're going to be careful.
Well, I'd like to emphasize your point because I think it's an excellent one. And to a large degree, we've already provided a significant amount of feedback around having a better understanding of how the bypass currently performs, and does it perform the way it was designed to perform. There are many folks in our region that do not believe that it does, that it doesn't serve the purpose that it was already intended to serve. And before we add anything else to it, we need to go back and correct that issue and essentially add to it if we're going to incorporate any additional purposes. And that speaks directly to existing vegetation in the bypass and how it affects conveyance. And it speaks to having a better understanding of the flow splits within the system, and do they occur the way we projected them to. And so a big part of our feedback as a region to the department has been making sure we understand the existing condition.
Look around this room and see a lot of gray hair that was born and raised here and know about that bypass.
Any other questions? Thank you, Eric.
Thank you.
Looking for a motion.
And I'll second it.
It's been moved and seconded. Are there any opposed? Hearing none, that is so ordered. Greg, you going to give a brief synopsis, or is Eric coming back for the council when we hear this again? Is this going to be a consent item on the council agenda? What's going to happen?
So I have it, it's on the agenda for the 17th of September. There will be, excuse me, it's a joint agenda report with a joint presentation both by the Army Corps of Engineers and the Regional Flood Management Plan, pretty much as was presented today. That should take place next Wednesday.
Oh, we get the Army Corps of Engineers back? That's good. Okay, that's a plus.
They'll be tougher on them.
It probably will be, watch out. Be prepared to duck. Okay, agenda item number 9, WSAFCA project updates.
Mr. Chairman and the board, I'm going to try and be as brief as I can in the interest of time. We've covered a lot of the stuff on the GRR and the Regional Flood Management Plan. Just real quickly, the 14-15, fiscal year 14-15 flood assessment roll has been submitted to the Yolo County Tax Collector for inclusion in the secured property tax roll. The Corps of Engineers completed their review and provided comments to the administrative draft of the final EIS. Obviously, the EIR was certified last month. Revisions to the final EIS are underway. Once that draft final EIS is complete, on the NEPA side, it will go out for another 30-day public review period. And again, that final approval and record of decision is not expected until early in 2015. On the real estate side, our draft real estate plan was submitted to Department of Water Resources Real Estate Branch for review, along with some appraisals and some Phase 1 assessments. That review of the draft real estate plan has been complete. It was viewed very favorably, and we've only received very limited comments, which we're addressing now, and we anticipate taking that plan back to the real estate branch for approval next week. One of the things that staff has also been working on is providing feedback to the Department of Water Resources on the recent release of the draft guidelines for the Urban Flood Risk Reduction Program. That's the next phase of funding for the Prop 1E funds. We're moving from EIP now to the UFR program. And we provided several comments to DWR last week, at least I think it was last week. And one of the places where we provided a significant amount of feedback was with the guidelines for the real estate process, both from the reimbursement, the cash flow, the retention, and on the policies related to all right-of-way acquisition.
Can I ask one question, Greg?
Sure.
On that UFR program, just so I kind of understand the funding from the state. Is that also going to be the mechanism that funds these regional facilities that Eric just presented to us, or is it specific to urban like it says, and there'll be another pot of money?
No, it
Or
would
is
be-
there another pot of money as of yet for the regional stuff?
I think it would be under the UFR guidelines. Under UFR, there's going to be different pots of money for urban and rural and small communities, but that's the mechanism for the funding.
Going forward on all the state
That's how they're gonna-
participating projects?
Yeah, that's how they distribute the remaining money under 1E. So under environmental services, SCS Engineers has implemented a new round of soil and groundwater sampling to further define the limits of the impacted soils at the contaminated site. Results of the sampling will be available later this month, which will then inform the development of a remedial action plan. On design, now that the EIR has been certified, our design team will be proceeding to completion of the 90% design deliverable for the levee improvements, and that's currently scheduled for late this year. And the final levee design is expected, 100% levee design expected in early 2015. Let's see. On the rivers erosion site, we've been experiencing some delays with the issuance and approval of the California State Lands Commission lease and other required regulatory permits to support or authorize the construction of that project. So it's being postponed until the summer of 2015, so we can avoid working in the river channel during the flood season, which is typically November through April. So we anticipate going out as quickly as we can next year once we get past the flood season. And then lastly, at last week's Flood Management Association annual conference, Crocker & Crocker presented an abstract on our award-winning 2013 Flood Preparedness Week program, which was very well received. And as you know, we're continuing to work on our 2014 Flood Preparedness Week activities, including working with the Washington Unified School District and leveraging the materials that we developed last year, such as the posters and stuff that the kids worked on, which will become part of our outreach materials. So that covers the things that I wanted to point out. Be happy to answer any other questions.
Are there any questions? Nope, don't see any. Informational items. Anybody have any informational items? Staff? Nope. Nope. Meeting's adjourned.